Okay, let us get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Very excited for today's conversation on feeling uncertain, how to thrive when you don't know what's next. And here on the screen, you can see our code of conduct. I know it's a lot of words there just to kind of digest it, but really the synopsis of it is just don't be a jerk. Have a great conversation. We want to make this a safe space for everyone. And I do like to say that the content shared during Power to Fly's events is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Just a few tips so we have a great conversation today. Feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like. No need to be Instagram perfect. Of course, if you're eating a sandwich, want to leave your camera off, that is fine as well. We are recording today's conversation, so no need to take notes. After today, you will receive a recording within the next 24 to 48 hours featuring today's talk, so check that out there. And we would love to hear from you. So feel free to write any questions in the chat and let us know what questions you might have for Elizabeth. And without further ado, I'd love to tell you a little bit about today's speaker's brand new book, How to Fall in Love with Questions. Very excited for this. It is out on HarperCollins, and you can scan that QR code there to order that. We will also share that link in the chat later in the conversation so you can take a look. Very excited. Sounds great. We'll dive in deeper in a second, but I want to tell you a little bit more about Elizabeth Weingarten, who is joining us today. She is an author, journalist, and applied behavioral scientist who works at the intersection of science and storytelling. Love that as a marketing and events professional. She has worked on the editorial staffs of The Atlantic, Slate, and Qatar Today, and was a managing editor of Behavioral Scientist. Her writing has appeared in publications including The Atlantic, Slate, CNN, The Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, and Time. She has led research programs at the think tank New America and has the consultancy Ideas 42 and at tech companies Torch and Udemy. She lives in Northern California with her husband and son. With that, Elizabeth, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you all so much for being here. It's such a delight to be able to talk about my favorite topics, questions and uncertainty. And really so excited to meet you all and to hear your questions. So just to kick us off, my book is all about how we can develop a different and healthier relationship with the uncertainty in our lives. And to give you a sense of kind of where this book came from, it really emerged during a time in my life when I was buckling under heavy questions about my marriage, about my career, and the advice that I found again and again in self-help and pop psychology books was to just embrace uncertainty. I don't know if all of you have heard that advice before, but to me, this felt like just a really unhelpful platitude, just kind of meaningless. And we're going to talk more about that in just a moment. But luckily, it was also around that time that I was facing a ton of uncertainty in my life that I discovered a much older book that contained what for me was much better advice, if not more challenging advice. And that book was called Letters to a Young Poet. And I'm curious for folks, if you want to put this in the chat, like who's heard of Letters to a Young Poet before, and oh, great! And Anna, I see your comment. I'm would love to talk more about that. And yes, layoffs. This is, when it comes to the big questions that we're facing in our lives, I know that is a huge one that a lot of people are going through right now. And I'm sure other folks on this call are kind of in similar positions. So we can definitely talk more about that. So for folks who want to share either, hey, have you heard of Letters to a Young Poet before? Or, what kind of moment of uncertainty are you currently in? Would love to hear from you on all of that. But for folks who aren't familiar with Letters to a Young Poet, This was a book of correspondence between the Austrian poet Rainier Maria Rilke and a 19-year-old aspiring poet, Franz Capus. And this was from the early 20th century. And it's a book that counts people like Lady Gaga, Dustin Hoffman, Marilyn Monroe among its fans. And I will say, I discovered that Lady Gaga even has a line of it from it tattooed on her. So the whole book is beautiful and I really recommend it. But I was struck by one part of it. And this is a part where Kappas is this aspiring 19-year-old poet, is asking Rilke for all kinds of advice, not only about how to become a poet, but really kind of how to live his life. And instead of giving him answers, Rilke responds, and I'll read this, and let's actually, yeah, exactly. Next slide. I want to ask you, dear sir, as best I can, to have patience about everything that is still unresolved in your heart, to try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms, like books written in a truly foreign language. Don't look for the answers now. They cannot be given to you yet because you cannot live them. And what matters is to live everything. For now, live the questions. If you do, then maybe gradually, without your realizing it, some far off day you will live your way into the answer. So I thought this was a beautiful idea, but of course, Rilke never explained what he meant by living the questions now or how to think about loving the questions. And he also wasn't thinking about how to do this during a time of AI, Google, smartphones, social media influencers. And it wasn't, I also didn't find in here kind of an explanation or a practical way of thinking about how do we love the questions of our lives, and particularly the ones that are most painful. And oops, it looks like, I'm not sure why oh, there, that's now it's showing up. Um, and for folks who have experienced a layoff and are really wondering what's next, that's a really painful and can be a really scary question, right? And so I was also grappling with these kind of painful and scary questions in my life. Just a little more context, I had left a job to pursue a creative project that ultimately was failing, and so I was kind of running out of savings, realized this project that I was trying to create was not going to be what I wanted it to be, was not going to kind of be viable in the market. And at the same time, I was newly married, and my marriage was also failing. And so I was questioning whether I was with the right person, if I should get a divorce. And so I really got curious, and the whole book is really revolves around this question of how do we love the questions of our lives, particularly the ones that can be really painful, and especially in a culture in which so many of us have become addicted to fast, easy answers. As I mentioned, the book is also about my journey to explore this question through science, history, philosophy, poetry, religion, and art. And it's full of lots of stories, full of science. I talked to lots and lots of different people, including a professor with a mysterious illness who devoted her life to figuring out how to live better in uncertainty, an undocumented immigrant who was breaking free of questions that had been holding him back, a woman paralyzed in a car accident who's rediscovering her identity, and various folks who are also grappling with career and vocation and how to understand, importantly, their self-worth outside of their identity as a professional, and what that looks like. And we can move on to the next slide. So let's go back to the basics here. And this question that I started my journey by asking, how do we fall in love with questions? And how does that become a strategy to thrive in uncertainty? So first, I do want to define uncertainty, because there are lots of ways that we can describe this and define it. But my favorite definition is a sense of doubt that blocks or delays action. And I like that definition because it gets at the physical experience of uncertainty that I think so many of us find to be really hard. In that it often makes us feel stuck, like we can't move forward, we can't do anything until and unless we have all of the answers. So the second thing I want to define here up front is the types of questions we're talking about when we think about this idea of loving the questions of our lives. I'm not necessarily talking about a question like, what am I having for dinner? Although, of course, that is an important question. I'm talking about the big life questions. So questions like, how do I live a life that feels meaningful? How do I recover after the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a career that I loved, or the loss of a job? How do I discover who I'm becoming, who I want to become in a next chapter of my life? And finally, what does love the questions even mean? I've come to define it as a strategy to really break through the paralysis of uncertainty, that stuckness that we can often feel. And it's a way of seeking the truth that's often less interested in a final answer or outcome, and a little more about what you might learn along the way. So we can move forward here. Okay, so at this point, you might be wondering, how is this any different than just telling somebody to embrace uncertainty? So, to me, as I was saying earlier, telling someone to embrace uncertainty is really deeply unhelpful for a lot of us. First, a part of that is because that advice to me just does not hold up when it comes to the painful uncertainty that many of us are holding in our lives. So, try offering that advice to somebody who's struggling with questions about their marriage, wondering how to cope with the death of a loved one, how to cope with a layoff, fearing the results of a biopsy. Somebody who maybe didn't get the promotion that they've been working towards, these kind of painful sources of uncertainty and change in our lives. So, to me, loving the questions is different. And to know how it's different, you have to know a little bit more about this poet Rilke's take on love. In another letter to Capys, this aspiring poet, he wrote that for one human being to love another human being, that is perhaps the most difficult task that has been entrusted to us. The ultimate task, the final test and proof, the work for which all other work is merely preparation. So the idea there to me that has been really freeing is that just like sustaining any type of committed relationship can be both painful and rewarding, loving the questions acknowledges that when we are kind of relating to uncertainty, it can be frustrating, it can be delightful, it can be freeing, exciting, just evolving. All of those things are expected and all of it is okay. And I think part of also why uncertainty can feel really hard is because we're often told constantly to reframe it into something that's purely positive. And this is, I think, a form of kind of that toxic positivity that's not only unreasonable, but also just a way to increase, I think, suffering during what can already be a challenging period. So we can move to the next one. Yeah. Um, so what I've learned throughout my reporting and kind of deep research into the science of this is it is possible to thrive in uncertainty, but we do have to think differently about what it means to thrive. The first kind of myth to unravel here is it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be happy all the time, and that's okay. Kind of negative emotions are part of it, and that kind of negative experience and the struggle is something that we all face together. Um, it's a common human reaction and experience. It doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong, that we're doing it wrong. Thriving in uncertainty also doesn't mean that we're going to get all the answers to all of our questions. Um, and I think in particular when it comes to some of these big life questions, some of them we may never answer in a permanent way, and that's also okay. What it does mean is taking control of what we can in our lives and getting unstuck. And we're going to talk about one tool out of many that I introduce in the book that you can use to help break free from the paralysis of uncertainty. So this tool is what I describe in the book as kind of developing a questions practice. If you're wondering what is a questions practice, it's pretty simple. You can think of it just like a meditation practice or a yoga practice, and it's really a time to understand, explore, and commit to the questions that are guiding your life. So in my work, I've found that there are four essential elements that can help you build a questions practice. So, first, questions practice is grounded in a mindset of curiosity. And that means relating to the uncertainty in your life with more curiosity than fear. And by approaching uncertainty with curiosity, you start asking questions and kind of allowing you to see your experience a little more clearly. And that part, this kind of figuring out what your question is and approaching it and approaching that experience of uncertainty with curiosity, that's where we're going to kind of start today in terms of building our own questions practice. But we'll get to that in just a moment. The second part of the practice is about conversation. So questions can, of course, exist on their own, but they more often come in kind of pairs or groups, and they're parts of conversations that we have with ourselves and we have with other people. And if we allow them, these conversations can help to guide us through uncertainty. And in the book, I share lots of practices and ideas to help you have better conversations with yourself during times of uncertainty. And it often helps to use kind of a set of answerable questions to help us feel more safe and secure so we can be more curious about those big unanswerable questions that I mentioned earlier. So some of these smaller questions that you can use could be, what am I noticing in my body right now? What are the facts I may not be looking at here? Um, you can also imagine that you're giving advice to someone else. Or even, I like this one, saying your name when you talk to yourself. These are all things that can kind of give you a little bit of space and distance from sometimes the difficult emotions that you might be feeling and experiencing. The next part is finding the right community. And this is really essential to being able to stick with our questions and thrive in uncertainty. And this makes sense when you think about what community evolved to do. And it really was evolved to enhance our sense of security during uncertainty. So, hundreds of thousands of years ago, early humans realized that by pooling resources and mental capacity, they had a much better chance of surviving, right? And so, modern neuroscience still shows us that when we feel like we're connected in a community, it reduces stress inducing cortisol, and it also activates parts of our brains that indicate we're getting a reward and we're safe. And so, really finding the right relationships and community have the power to help us feel more safe and secure, even while we're feeling uncertain and holding questions that make us feel the opposite. And finally, we need to figure out how to commit to this process of exploring questions while also staying open to when we might need to let certain questions go. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But sometimes we don't want to continue living certain questions. These are questions that may no longer be worthy of our attention. Maybe they're keeping us stuck in patterns of rumination and regret. Um, so I'll pause here and I'm just gonna take a look at the chat because I know folks have been putting things in. Oh, great. I'm glad folks are connecting on LinkedIn. So we can move forward, and I know we are a little tight on time, so I'll try to go through this quickly. Um, but in the book, I provide what I call a questions map, and it's full of prompts to help guide folks through what a questions practice can look like. But the basic idea is to help you move from feeling stuck in uncertainty in this question to having the clarity to move through it more purposefully. And you can start by gaining awareness of what your question is and really getting curious about whether it's the right question and how to even identify the right question. And today we're going to do the first part. So if folks would like, I would invite you all to share in the chat the question that might be making you kind of anxious right now. Or maybe it's just a question that's weighing heavily on you. And you do not have to share it all, but you are welcome to. And remember, we're talking about the questions that aren't necessarily going to be answered by Google, but the ones that are, or ChatGPT, but these are the questions, the big life questions about identity, meaning, purpose, fulfillment, relationships, love, loss. So once you have that question, the next part is really evaluating, is this the right question? Is this the type of question you want to ask? Um, and in particular, I've found through many of the folks that I spoke to, that when we're feeling fearful, when we're feeling anxious and uncertainty, sometimes we ask binary questions. So for me, what this looked like was I was asking myself, should I get a divorce? And kind of, am I ever going to find another job or a job that feels fulfilling to me the way that, another job did? And what I discovered was that, this wasn't a question that was opening up possibilities for the future. And so, what I would invite all of you to think about is is there a way to reframe the question that you're asking so that it does open up more possibilities for you? And so, from kind of, am I ever going to find another job, which is that binary question, could you instead ask, what kind of work have I always wanted to do? Or how could I use this time to learn a new skill or consider a different career path? Or I'm sure there are tons of other questions that, again, might open up possibilities for the future. Uh, the other considerations is your question serving as kind of an internal GPS? Is it empowering you to move forward, or is it keeping you stuck in, maybe it's a pattern of rumination or regret, or is it kind of inherently devaluing you? I think sometimes we ask questions, and embedded in the question is a questioning of our own self-worth and value as people. And so that's another really important thing to look out for. So I'm going to pause here because I know we just have a few time, and I do want to make sure we have time for questions. And I love that people are putting questions in the chat too. But I'll pause, Rob, and see if you want to moderate that part.
Thank you so much. Well, first off, there's so, gosh, so much here. I'm gonna definitely share this with my husband because it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many good things here. Yeah, so I mean, I kind of wanted to go back up to the beginning of what Anna was saying that you mentioned at the top, Elizabeth. They were going through a sudden layoff and not sure where to go next. And your messaging was resonating a lot, but real quick, what would you say? Because yes, there's these binaries, as you mentioned. I either have a job or I don't have a job. If anyone on the line is kind of went through a layoff, what would your recommendations be to that person?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's really really hard to go through a layoff, and just acknowledging that you don't that however you feel going through the layoff is okay, and I think it's natural to feel, um, you know, at least when I've gone through kind of job changes myself, feeling a sense of grief, a sense of possibility, kind of fear, excitement, all of the things. And I would say, uh, and sorry, I'm just looking at the chat here. Um, yeah, it's and I love this. I'm just looking, Trisha. When I'm laid off, try to be honest about what I hate to do, so I at least have some clarity. I think, to me, one of the most helpful things that I've done during periods of transition in careers, and what I heard from other folks who had been through similar circumstances, is to try to understand um, um, what type of possibilities and what type of kind of growth could this open up for you. And I want to share a story actually that I think is really helpful and instructive here. And this is a story of a woman. Her name is Barbara Schoen, who I talked to for the book. And she was somebody who had kind of risen through the ranks in a Fortune 500 company, and had found a lot of success in her job. She was kind of moving up and up and up. And then something really unexpected and awful happened to her, and that was she was in a car accident and was paralyzed from the waist down. And I think, talking to Barbara, it would have been easy for her to share a story with me about how it led to this kind of diminished life. It was something that was wholly negative, something that just limited her and held her back. But what I learned from her was that this huge change that she went through was actually an opportunity to completely kind of rethink her identity, and to she had, before the accident, been thinking to herself, I'm in this career, it doesn't quite feel right, but I don't really have time to think about it, right? I just kind of have to keep going. this event forced her to, or this event that happened in her life, forced her to really kind of rethink who she wanted to be, and how she wanted to leave an impact on the world. And she told me that it actually gave her, counterintuitively, a sense of freedom. It was like she all of a sudden got to stretch into a new identity, right? As if it was kind of a new yoga pose. And so I share that because I think that, for many of us who are going through painful and extreme versions of uncertainty in our lives, we can absolutely feel that grief. And I think it's an opportunity to ask this question of, okay, how might this help me grow and change? What are the different possibilities, that this could offer? Are there things that I've always wanted to do? Are there, ideas that have kind of been nagging at me, that maybe I can consider or pursue? Or, to Trisha's point, are there ways that I can get clarity about what I loved about my last job and what I hated about my last job? So the next thing that I find can be different and better. So, those are some of the questions that I think you can be asking yourself, during this time. Not to say that it in any way, diminishes some of the kind of challenge, right, of it. But it's a kind of but and, right? And it can be an opportunity to grow and to kind of consider, um, uh, who you might, become, in this new phase and transition of your life, which can also be really exciting.
I love all that, and Trisha's saying sometimes a great opportunity is presented. It's so scary as a change, and that's one of the
Yeah.
common threads I'm seeing in the chat there, Elizabeth, is that word change, right? Like Barbara's situation was a change that was thrust upon her. We have maybe the lesser version of that. You lose your job. Yes, that's bad, but you're not in a car accident. And then other people have change that they want to enact. And I'm seeing people on here saying, I don't know, if it's my time to make a change, but they're considering that, but they're taking the action to make that change. I love all that. And just before we run out of time, one question that we had pre-submitted, I'd love to throw over to you. Someone was saying, when uncertainty triggers anxiety or makes us feel stuck, what's the first step you suggest to help us move forward? I know you shared some of those great steps from your book, but if someone can just take that one first step to get out of that anxious place all of us find ourselves in, what should that first step be?
Yeah, I think the first step is, and this sounds really easier said than done, but it's getting clear on what is the question that is behind that anxiety or that source of stress. I think that so often we kind of can be going throughout the day and feeling like I'm so anxious, I'm so stressed about, this uncertainty, but we're not often as clear on, well, what's the question that is driving this? What am I actually fearful about? Or what's the kind of what's the uncertainty fear that's behind this feeling of anxiety? So I think that the first step to me is really getting clear on the question. And once you're clear on the question that's driving or that's contributing to that anxiety, then you can actually start to reframe it. And that's when you start to kind of claim a little more agency, over that feeling and that experience. And I should also say too, part of what can be really liberating about understanding the question and knowing what it is, and this kind of strategy of loving and living the questions, is you don't have to answer the question right away. So it frees you from that sense of urgency of, I need to answer this question right now. Oh my gosh, which I think can contribute to that sense of anxiety, right? And so my hope is that you can take this and feel a sense of a little bit more of a sense of ease, right? About some of these big questions that might be weighing on you, that it's okay to just live them right now. That's more than okay. That's actually, that might be the wisest thing, that you can do, in this moment. So, I'll pause there.
No, I love that. And I think it's resonating with kind of what Trisha's saying there, that
Yeah,
it's about a step. So
exactly.
many of us think about these kind of big life changes as these leaps, but
Yes,
it's maybe better for us to kind of reimagine these as these steps. And if you're in the context of work, maybe you're going into a new role. You don't always have to think this is the role I'm going to be in until I retire, right? This is a role, maybe
exactly.
I'm going to do it for a few years. I'm going to see if this is a fit for me. I'm going to experience something new. I'm going to grow professionally, and then I'm going to go on to something else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've done that myself, kind of taken roles where it's like, you know what, I just need I need a paycheck right now. And so, I had an experience early on in my career where I had to leave a really toxic management environment. And I decided, you know what, I need to take a job. I can't be too choosy about what that job is. And it ended up opening doors that I never could have imagined. I thought that it was going to be a job that I stayed in for a couple months, maximum, but it was, so again, I think we kind of never know what's going to be behind the next door, right? And so I think absolutely it can be something that you stay in temporarily. It could be something that is really more meaningful than you ever could have imagined.
Yeah, and I love what Anna is saying here as we
Yeah.
start to wrap up, just about asking ourselves these big questions. And I think so many of us these days are inundated. We're doing our work, we've got our social media, there's a million things on television. So we're always like, are we taking the time to like ask these questions? Because I think you're very correct, Elizabeth. The anxiety comes up from sometimes needing to have an answer instantly rather than going back to kind of look at the source of that. So I love all of this, and clearly we'll have to have you back because we can dive into more chapters from your book. As we let you go and our audience go, where can people find about how to fall in love with questions? I just put the link in the chat, but where else can people keep up with you and keep up with the book?
Yes. So you put in some great links there. There's also my Substack, which is, and I think there's a slide on it. The next slide,
Well,
let's see. But I'll also put it in the Substack. It's Time Travel for Beginners. That should be the right link. Let me just make sure. Yes, so would love, if anybody's on Substack, I will be posting regularly there, but please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer more questions. And again, so grateful for everybody's time. So thank you so much for being here, and
well,
great to chat with all of you.
thank you, Elizabeth. I'm super excited to read more about the book, and judging by what love you're getting in the chat, everyone else is as well. So please check out Elizabeth's Substack, check out the book from HarperCollins, follow her on LinkedIn, and thank you for spending your, what day is it? Thursday afternoon, morning, or evening with us here at Power to Fly. We'll be back soon with more events just like this one, hopefully one with Elizabeth. And have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Take